Welcome to 50 years of advertising research. When we set out to prepare this special issue with Jeffrey Precourt and Catherine Gardner and Doug Hughes, we said to ourselves at the time that 50 years is a tall order. I mean, I would imagine half of the people in this room weren't born 50 years ago. Thousands, literally thousands of people have contributed to articles just in the Journal of Advertising Research, and yet this piece covers journals from all the other marketing and technology disciplines. So we're looking at tens of thousands of researchers. And we said we had about 30 minutes, now about 28 minutes, to put it all into short, to-the-point questions and answers. How have we made better business decisions, or in what way have we not made better business decisions? How can we fix it? What did we learn that is most valuable? And what else do we need to learn? And to answer those questions, we need people who are not just quick thinkers and fast talkers, but very, very smart and who've been on the scene for many years. So I don't want to take up any more time as the moderator. I want to turn the first question over to Gian. So Gian, how has the research community, based on the research that is the way it's usually done, how have we failed to contribute to better business decisions?
You start with the old timer. So I think I'd mention two pet peeves that I have, that I've observed over the years. The first is I think that the research industry hasn't done a particularly good job of maintaining continuity. And I know Ted McConnell has a phrase that I've quoted him on a number of times. We seem to forget the truths that transcend change. And so research that was done years ago is forgotten and ignored, and maybe in part it's a function of the churn and the turnover in companies, both on the client side and the supplier side. But I think we lose a lot of knowledge, and then we kind of reinvent the wheel, and we spend money doing the same things over and over again. And emerging media, like the internet, seem to believe that advertising began with the internet and ignore everything that was done before it. So that's one pet peeve. The other one is that I think we've done a poor job of integrating the work that's done on the academic side with the commercial side. And maybe you could say that some of that academic research is esoteric and maybe not for commercial purposes, but I think there's just a lot of really good work that could be applied there that for some reason or another ends up not happening.
Okay. Eileen.
Well, I think for us, the thing that I see the most is that we've probably been too focused on the craft. Not that the craft isn't important, but not adequately focused on the business impact of the work we do. So too often we do a piece of research that's well received in the research department, but it doesn't really influence the business. It's not, business decisions aren't being made on the basis of the research. And I think the other thing that is a big challenge for us, and will continue to be a big challenge going forward, is speed. I mean, speed is going to be the new currency in the research world, and if we think for a minute that corporate leadership is going to wait around for the research before they move, we're probably sorely mistaken. So we've got to get data in the hands of decision makers at the right time.
Well, I certainly would agree with Gian. And when I thought about that question, the whole lack of continuity, the transience that with which we approach research problems came right to the top of my mind. I think it also is manifested in its evil twin, which is faddism, where we tend to latch on to a methodology or an approach or a solution that we're very enthusiastic about for a moment, and then it kind of passes and it yields to the next one. And if you've been in the business long enough, you kind of can see them almost cycle through, renamed. I mean, I can think back 30 years ago in magazine research, we were all enthusiastic about quality of reading, which then a decade or so later became involvement, and then a decade or so later became engagement. It was basically the same thing. But we never really went back to look at the prior work and stand on the shoulders of people that had come before, probably in part because of that failure to connect not only to our own background, but also to academic literature. The other thing I'd point out is, I'd say we don't always do a good job of corroborating. we're really in the business of finding evidence, and we can seek that from individual pieces of research that we get, but any individual piece of research might be led astray. It's an observation made from a given vantage point in a particular point in time, and if it's true, you should find evidence for it in some other manifestation, some other bit of behavior. So when in my group at Condé Nast, we don't really certify something as an insight unless we can find corroborating evidence from at least one or preferably two other observation points, preferably not reliant on anything close to the same methodology. Then you have a bit more confidence to say this is really what's going on in the market, this is really what's going on with consumers, and we can act on that. Otherwise, you're much more vulnerable to making a mistake that can lead to a poor business decision.
Well, so in addition to identifying the problem in 45 seconds or less, what about the solutions to things like knowledge management and not being focused enough on business, or maybe being a bit faddish from time to time, or not corroborating? These are not new for us, so how do we make them old and get rid of them?
So just two suggestions on this continuity issue. I think that, and I thought at one time a company had emerged that was building these systems, but some kind of a knowledge repository that's company specific, where you have an easy way to access all of the knowledge that has been acquired by that company and in the general industry, and that would avoid reinventing the wheel. That would be, I think, a step forward. And I thought, again, there was somebody who was pursuing that as a business. I think it's a great idea, so I'd encourage anybody who's thinking about it to do it. The other, though, is try to figure out a way to maintain what I would call the keeper of the flame. Right, and I'll mention one person who I remember really did an excellent job of this, and this was Boyd Snedden, who ran the research department at Big G, at the Big G cereal division at General Mills, and he was viewed as the keeper of the flame. And people would often turn to him and ask him, well, have we done this before? Or he would interject, well, we did that piece of research and spent a lot of money on it 10 years ago. There's no point in redoing it. So those are two suggestions I would have that maybe would help address the problem.
And I'd say, Larry, we're depending on guys like you a lot. One of the things that we really know is we need a different kind of talent in the business, not to be dismissive of today's talent, but as the demands for more holistic thinkers, people who can weave in other sources of business information besides just survey research, we're really looking to the educational community. We're really looking to our own professional development programs to build the new kind of researcher who can drive real business impact.
But and thank you. I'll try to deliver on that. But,
Thank you.
But until the undergrads and grads that come out of the world the next few years make it into our industry, how do we make the existing collection of really good, technically qualified researchers, how do we make them more business oriented? How do we do that? I keep hearing that. How do we do that?
They obviously benefit a lot from actually understanding the business problems, of actually trying to figure out, where's the money, for one thing, working closely with the business side and understanding what the levers are there that we might be able to influence. I think also, to answer the more general question of how we build more continuity, I think part of it is in the way that we set up problems within our own firms. I think there's a big benefit in actually trying to formulate them as hypotheses, of kind of keeping theory at the top of the pile, if you will, that you're trying to prove or disprove a particular statement about, say, how consumers behave in a particular way, or what's driving the dynamics in a given marketplace. If you can articulate it as a theory with maybe some sub-parts that need to be verified or rejected, it abets that accumulation of wisdom. It helps to internalize it within an organization because it puts it in language that our constituents, our internal customers can understand. And it keeps us focused on what it is we're actually trying to study, rather than getting too diverted by distractions or the fads or whatever else.
That is a very good jumping off point to the second question. The special issue, all the authors were charged with tell us what's the most important thing, or most important couple of things in the area of knowledge that you have been charged with summarizing and writing. And we also asked them all, tell us the one area that we still need to learn a lot more about. And that's why we have the questions on the table today. And we're at that point where, so what is the most important theory or finding or piece of learning in your career? And I'm going to have, it's your turn to start first, Eileen. What's the most important thing that you think is, that you feel comfortable is somewhat close to the truth, and we can all believe in, and it's shaped many business decisions, and it's been one of the most important things that you have observed?
Yeah, it's sort of the laws of marketing physics. Huh? You know, obviously, the internet changes everything in our world, but to me, the thing that's made the biggest difference in the research industry is just the computing power that's available to us now. I mean, I sound a bit like a dinosaur saying I remember getting my first PC and, you know, wanting a gig of memory in it, and having to have workstations to do the kind of modeling and forecasting that we can do today on, you know, probably your phone. So to me, one of the most important things that we've developed is the ability to kind of prove the truth through great modeling and terrific marketing science, and sort of the blending of the art and the storytelling with the confidence that there is a foundation of real truth in what we're advising a client or what a client's trying to do with the piece of research.
Scott, in terms of the theoretical finding that's most impressed you?
I'd say it isn't a single finding, but it's a cluster of findings that point to a common truth and observation that sooner or later, the consumer's going to do what the consumer wants to do. You can't fight City Hall. If they want to avoid ads, they're going to figure out a way to avoid ads. If they don't want to take your phone call, they're going to buy the next available technology to screen those calls and to be able to have it their way. If they want to fragment their attention among a host of different platforms, they're going to do that, and there's nothing that we can do about it. We tend to try to chase them, and I think we do it in a very frankly hostile and oppositional way. Our dominant metaphor in our business, the advertising business, tends to be Marshall. You know, they're targets. It's an ad campaign. You could almost imagine the missiles coming in at the poor consumer, and the consumer is really never, they're still going to have their way. And so I think wherever we are in a situation where we're providing advertising that's in context, that is of value to them, or that it can intrigue them, where they meet us halfway, where they co-create with us, then we're in a zone that makes sense. But all of the other stuff that we tend to do is fruitless and counterproductive, I think.
It's interesting because, you know, I point out to people all the time, we call them respondents in the research industry. It's like they're people. You know, they're not targets, they're not consumers, they're people.
So one of the things I've learned is the importance of price to the consumer and the damaging impact that can have on the way that marketers spend money, because it's very seductive. It allows you to move a lot of product very quickly, and, you know, Lord knows we're all under pressure increasingly today. So this came home vividly to me in the 80s. So we at IRI had introduced Behavior Scan. It was measuring advertising impact on sales pretty precisely. And I thought, well, that's going to drive growth in advertising. And I was stunned to find that the exact opposite happened, because at the same time as we were running all of these ad tests, scanning was being expanded nationally, and suddenly marketers realized how much product they could move with a price reduction, with an in-store display, a feature ad, and lo and behold, rather than advertising taking off, the opposite happened. It stalled, and promotions and price reductions took off to the tune of, I think the number is $40 billion a year of additional money is being spent today versus the pre-scanning days by marketers. And I think this has just been continued with the internet. We are now in a situation where I think we're entering some, in my opinion, some tricky ground here, because we've now got a consumer who can track back to the lowest price really easily. All right, they got smartphones, 30% of the subscribers are using them. You can be in a physical store, see the product that you want, check it out, get online, find out that Amazon's got it at 20% less, and off you go and buy it. And so we're getting to a situation where price is becoming, I fear, the driver of consumer decision making, which could lead to one of two outcomes, all right? On the one hand, it could mean that advertising spending and investments in creative advertising is not going to continue. Or, I'm an optimist, I think the following might happen. We might actually be at a tipping point where to really create a difference in a brand and a brand's value to the consumer, suddenly we get a renaissance of focus on advertising. And we get a creative rebirth and a focus on all of those things that maybe we've kind of forgotten as price has become the dominant driver. But I am an optimist, you have to remember that.
You think about something like Groupon, right? Now
That's
every small business gets the pleasure of procurement. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Groupon's a great example. I mean, they've got a database now. I was talking to them last week. They're in Chicago, so I've gotten to know them. They have, in the US alone, 37 million email addresses that they are communicating with every day with these special offers. By this time next year, they say they will have 70 million if they continue growing. Wow. Well, I mean, that on a, if you translate on a household basis, about 3/4 of the total US population. And they're communicating out these deals after deal after deal, which, it's great if you're bringing in new buyers, right? And then you can hold on to them as repeaters, so it's a trial generator. But there is another side to it, which is when we might just be training consumers just to buy on price again, which, could end up being very positive for advertising.
I was looking at a study last week that was trying to get under the hood of what exactly what consumers are doing when they are doing research online on products and services, and the dominant form of research was really just price comparison.
Looking for price.
And even going to, say, retailer prices, going to see what Nordstrom's was selling it for versus
the numbers.
Walmart.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are staggering, and I think that, if you ask retailers today, what are you most worried about? A retailer with a physical store. I think they'll play back to you the fact that we are now competing with the internet in our own stores. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Yeah. And prices, I think, is at the bottom of it. And so the more opportunities that the consumer has to find the best price, I think the more likely that is to drive their ultimate buying decision, which does create the opportunity for advertising.
I mean, it's so similar to what we deal with in our industry, right? Information is ubiquitous for consumers now. So you've got to stand for something more than just price, because they've got perfect information when buying.
I mean, in a B2B sense, I doubt there's a single supplier here in the room who doesn't hate dealing with the procurement people, the clients, right? I mean, price is becoming the driver of so many decisions.
To take it back to a comment that Scott made, that the consumer is going to do what the consumer is going to do. Do we think what the consumer is going to do today is any different than what the consumer would have done 30 years ago before all this technology?
No, but they're just much more empowered now, by the internet primarily. I mean,
They're going to do it quicker. They're going to,
Quicker?
Yeah, the consumer's got all the information at their fingertips.
I think the whole process is going to become kind of transparent to the consumer. I mean, I might go as far as to say that I wonder whether pricing power isn't with the consumer now. And that's a very, very different world. Yeah. Now, can you affect a consumer's decision to be based on something other than price? Yeah, I think so. I thought that was the whole purpose of advertising when you come right down to it.
It makes advertising even more important now than ever.
Yeah,
right? That's right.
I tend to think so.
Let me move on to the next question, and Scott will take a shot at it. So, what else do we need to know that we don't know now that's going to be important to make this industry and our economy more effective going forward?
Well, I think there probably are a bunch of places where we could benefit enormously. One thing that we have been doing work on that I think needs a lot more work is in the integration of data from different kinds of sources. I mean, I focus a lot on media research, of course, so I look at audience estimates based on classic random samples, but those get integrated with data from maybe a deep dive of a partial view of the universe that you're studying. That integration is very fitful. It's very difficult to do in a way that makes sense. I actually think that the unified measurement at comScore is a wonderful example of tackling that problem. It's a problem that had been out there for a very long time, and it's a significant step forward in integrating the viewpoints from very, very different kinds of data streams. So I think we need to be able to do more and more of that, because to some degree, always every observation is going to be partial, and it's going to be blinkered a little bit more by the limitations of the point of observation. And then just to loop back to the earlier comments, I think there's a lot in allied social sciences and behavioral sciences that we can benefit from. The work in neuroscience, I think, is very interesting and very promising. Work in network theory is very promising and interesting. All of these shouldn't really be kept at bay and at the side of the activity that we address in our profession. I think they can help us a lot. So I think those are big open areas.
Yeah.
Gian?
So I heard Alan Wurzel from NBC say this at a conference a week or so ago, that he thinks that the biggest challenge for the media industry is measuring multimedia consumption of content, and that it's become such a fragmented world that it has to be done, number one. Number two, it's not easy to do it. And it's difficult enough to get the consumer to participate in one medium. If you got to get them on their TV set and their mobile device and the internet as well, you're dealing with some really expensive implementation there. And the solution might well be in the hands of the companies that are communicating all of this content to the consumer. And so that we researchers might have to enlist the cooperation of the people, the companies that have data that it would be too expensive to set up from scratch. So get data from the cable companies, from the satellite companies, from the VCR companies, et cetera, and assemble that together with what the research companies can do on their own. And I appreciate the unified comment, Larry, because that's what I think is an example of that. So it's combining data that is available from the industry itself with information that can be built by the research company. I think personally that's the future. But I think we have to address this multimedia issue, because it's just it's a fact of life. It's getting even more fragmented, if anything. And so being able to measure what your ad is doing, or how your ad is being delivered, the reach, the frequency across multiple devices is, I think, where the challenge lies going forward.
Okay.
And I'd say I'm in complete agreement with Scott that our future is going to depend on being able to integrate data from multiple sources and recognizing that survey research is only, a fragment of all the information we need. So, my hypothesis that I say all the time is I'm guessing 10 years from now, we'll still be data-based problem solvers, but maybe a third of that data will come from primary research, and 2/3 of it will come from other sources of information. When Scott was talking about doing cover testing and integrating things like the price of gas into his modeling, I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to think about, how we integrate kind of macroeconomic information. So I think that's going to be a big thing. I think the other thing that's going to be a really interesting challenge for us as an industry is how do we start to create data collection devices that have utility for the consumer, for the person who's actually participating. So what's in it for me? Whether it's, instead of doing a pantry check, I give you a shopping list app. So there's something in it, because we're probably the only industry in the world that has largely been dependent on a free supply chain. For the most part, for years, the raw material of our business has been people's willingness to cooperate, to participate for no real value except to have their voice heard. So I think we do have to start thinking about what's the utility for the people who participate in research.
The long-term trends on things like survey cooperation rates, of course, have not been particularly happy for people.
They've been dismal.
They've fallen and fallen, and we accept lower and lower response rates as a fact of life. What probably doesn't get as much attention, but a platform or purview here where we're really looking back over 50 or 75 years is a perfect time to call attention to the fact that we've moved a lot from self-reported behavior to passively reported behavior. And that is a shift that is very, very much justified by the data. Response effects in surveys are significant, and they're probably a bigger source of error than sampling errors, which we tend to focus on more. Right now, print media, for example, magazines are still primarily done, the audience are estimated through self-reported behavior. In every other medium where we've moved in television and radio to actual physical measurement of that, and the internet as well, we've seen very significant shifts, usually more of a long tail phenomenon. People don't remember their behavior very effectively. So I would be very happy to see us evolve quickly in a direction that shifts almost into where we stop trying to ask people about their behavior. We save the surveys for opinions, images, and other things that are more suitable to surveys, and less trying to get people to recount what is increasingly impossible to reconstruct because it's too fragmented and
Eileen, I bet you have a point of view about that.
I agree completely that the more behavioral information we can get, the better. I do sort of feel that the listening agenda, at the risk of swimming against the tide, is a little bit overplayed. I didn't get into this business, I don't think probably most of us did, to be sort of a passive listener. We're about dialogue. We're about creating real conversations with consumers. But I agree with Scott completely that those real conversations should be about the things that you'd talk to normal people about. You don't say to somebody, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
Yeah. What did you listen to between 9 and 9:30 a.m.?
You say, hey, Scott, what's going on in your life? Or...
I think this representativity issue is going to rear its head in different ways than it is today. I mean, I moderated one of the panels at the conference that was focused on quality of survey panels, and there's some really interesting work being done there to try to make sure that we do have representativity addressed. We'll probably have that issue coming up, it hasn't already, with listening, right? And can you tap the social networks to get an accurate reading of what consumers are thinking and feeling, or do you have to worry about whether you're getting a biased picture? I mean, I think it's a pretty fundamental question. So I can see a lot of work happening in that area going forward.
I think we spend so much time talking about instead of talking about in addition to. So social media is a great addition to the mix, but in most cases it's not instead of.
Well, I want to throw one more question on the table since we're about a minute left to 2 minutes. And what underscores moving to passive monitoring, as Scott points out, does that present some privacy issues? And if so, how's that wrinkle going to challenge the industry? And this will be my last question before we break for lunch.
I mean, the privacy is a big issue, and it's just the powers that be and the political area are all over this, and I'm sure that in a way that we as researchers are concerned about. But I think if you do a couple of things, you're on safe ground. I think you have to make it really clear to the respondent or to the consumer what it is that you're collecting and what you're doing. And you can't hide it in legalese. You can't put what you're really doing down at the bottom of a long EULA. That's just going to cause a problem. So you have to be clear, and you have to get explicit permission from them. And I think if you do that, then you've got the sign-off of the consumer and you're okay. But boy, if you don't, I mean, you really, I think, are treading on some really troublesome ground today.
I think it's a huge political issue, but I'm also always surprised by how very little the consumer wants to trade away their privacy. It's sort of a theoretical issue, but when you say to somebody, well, I'll give you this if you'll give me that, it's amazing how readily they'll trade away their privacy. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that was the work that was done by CBS, where they asked people, would you prefer to have no ads on your online video content? And the answer was sure. if you rephrase the question and say you've got a choice, right? You can pay $2 to watch this content and there's no ads, or you get the ads and you don't pay anything. I think the number was something like 90%, 95% of the people chose to take the ads. So I think if we communicate correctly, but that it's easy to say what I'm about to say, but if we communicate clearly to the consumer, we might be surprised at what they're willing to do.
It's also a function of the endpoint, because if what we're talking about is tracking people across all of their activities so that they can get like a targeted ad that feels a little creepy, like how do they know who's keeping this list, then that's one kind of outcome. If it really is just to provide ratings for the media that people go to, where they get to vote implicitly by their what they're paying attention to, then that's something else again. And I think you can, if you express that clearly, people can make an informed decision. I completely agree, though, that it has to be transparent.
Well, I think Jan and Eileen and Scott, I think you've earned your lunch today. Can we give them applause?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.